All right. Thank you for coming out this evening. I realize it's very rainy today again. I do thank you for coming. The water is in the back. I chilled it. It's cold. It's free. If you want some of the cookies that are back there, I just added some plates and napkins. So if you want those, please take them. That's what they're there for. So thank you all for coming. My name is Victor. And just so you know, because one of the things that I've noticed about going through these databases is that they sometimes look differently in different web browsers. So I'm letting everyone know right now I'm using Chrome. And so the things that you'll see will look this way in Chrome. If you go into a different web browser and it looks slightly different, just try using Chrome. So that's what we'll be using today. Okay, so the first thing we want to go over is how do we get to the online newspapers that are available through our website? So right now we're at schaumburglibrary.org. And we're going to go to e-library. And right here it says newspapers. And as you can see, it's pretty simple. We go straight to newspapers that way. So the first one I want to take a look at, which I figure is pretty popular amongst a lot of us, will be the Chicago Tribune, 1849 to present. So I'm going to take a look at this one. What's up, doll? Now, if you first come to it for the first time, it might look something like this. I seldom use the basic search. So generally speaking, I'm always going to go to advanced search. It's something that I'm always going to include more details than the basics, and that usually makes us search shorter. However, since we're just starting out, we're going to go ahead and do a simple search. So quite often, one of the reasons why people use newspapers is because they're looking for obituaries. So we're going to look anywhere. There are a number of ways you can change this, but right now we're just going to look for anywhere. I pretty much always use full text because if you're looking through a newspaper and it says it was printed on this date, but then doesn't show you anything, it doesn't really help that much. So for publication date, we're going to take a look at December 1920. And this is just a basic example. We're not looking for anyone specific right now. Now you see it says search here. We're going to pass that for now. I'm going to tell it to select all of these. Select all of these. My Spanish is not that great, so I'm going to leave that one alone. Scroll back up. I'm going to choose search. So now a number of things come up. We're going to take a look at the left side here. Notice it says historical newspapers. When I was first using these databases, I ended up looking under newspapers, which didn't get me very many results. But when I looked under historical newspapers, that proved to be a lot more fruitful. If we had wanted to change the date some more, there is the custom date option. There's document type, which is useful. Sometimes advertisements pops up here, depending on what you're searching for. Advertisements can be very useful. I'll explain in a moment. Since we're just looking at obituaries, we're going to pick that. And since we're using basically the database, we already know publication title is going to be the Chicago Tribune. Databases are Tribune, and ProQuest is what handles a lot of the newspaper databases that we use here. And you'll see me doing a number of different things as I'm talking to people online, I'm talking to people here. I'm also taking down notes of various things that are going on the computer. Okay, so there are a couple ways to see the results. Now, if you're just doing some basic searches where you're basically keeping track of who's who, what's where, and things like that, you would choose details. So click on details. It'll tell you, the page, what it's from, publication year. This is useful information I should add because if you're working on genealogy, one of the things that you want to be careful of is to make sure that you keep track of where you found everything. Number one, you may decide that you want to go back and research something you might have missed. And number two, people will probably be using your notes later on, and they'll want to get an idea of where you found certain information. However, you choose full text PDF. One of the things you'll notice is that it's like you're reading the actual newspaper. It's similar to a microfilm machine. For everyone who remembers what microfilm is, I use them. I suspect a lot of us here have used them, but some people might not have used a microfilm machine before, but it was interesting. When you're scrolling up and down the article, if you use the gray bar over on this side, then you're moving the whole page. So what you want to do is go further in, and you can use the gray bar on the inside. You're probably thinking that you can't read this very easily. So right now, you see the percentage is at 96. If we move it up to 200, then we can read it more easily. A couple of other things to look at here. We have these triple lines. This is usually for if you look something up and there's more than one page, which we will see later in the presentation. Since we're just looking at obituaries right now, they usually fit that onto one page. We don't have to worry about that. I usually just click on the percentage and type in the percentage, but you can also use the plus and minus symbols to do that as well. This causes it to fit the entire page, but of course, in this situation, it's something that's long and narrow, so we probably won't want to use that. And when you come across pictures and maps that you might want to take a look at, you click on this and it flips it around. Once again, not very useful for looking at obituaries, but again, as I mentioned before, when you're looking at maps, that can sometimes be very helpful. Right here, we have a way to download it. And one of the things that I would suggest is if you're ever doing genealogy inside of a library, whenever you go to, whenever you find something of interest, I highly advise that you download it or print it. The reason is because newspapers might not decide to do this forever. So you might find something of use, and then a few years later, you'll decide to go back to it, and then you'll discover it's no longer available. That's something that happens in the world of online tools. So if you ever come to the library to do some genealogy research, and we have a lot of computers here for doing that, I would strongly recommend bring 2 flash drives. The reason why I say 2 is there have been plenty of times where if I've had flash drives just completely break down on me, it happens. So bring 1 flash drive to do the saves and bring a second flash drive to back up everything that you're doing. The other option is you can also print it, or you could really do both. And once again, two-page view, this is usually when the document is multiple pages that you bring up. But again, since we're looking at obituaries right now, we don't have to worry about that. Okay. So there are other ways of also keeping track of what you looked at. So details was one. Another one here in the top right, it says Cite. And if you click on Cite, instead of having to grab Turabian or something else in the 800s, it shows you how to cite it right here. And you can just hit copy, and that copies it onto the computer, and then you can paste it into a Word document or an Excel file that you might be keeping. Or you can, if you're using any of these, just export it to those. So those are various ways of keeping track. For copy URL, it basically copies this at the top. That can sometimes be tricky depending on which ProQuest database that you're using, because you might copy the URL, but then when you try to go back to it later, you end up having to log in and put passwords or library cards in or something like that. I personally find this site to be better. This print option is the same as this print option, that download the same as that download. All options is pretty much anything you might want to do to save it. I know a lot of people use Google Drive, so that's a way to send it to your cloud. Okay. So another nice thing is you might see, okay, this newspaper looks really interesting. I'm kind of curious to see what else is in here. You have browse this issue here and also here. When you click on browse this issue, so now we have the entire newspaper page, and you can go to different pages at the top here. You could just type them, or you can use the arrows. So let's say we decide to browse a section. You just left click on one of the areas that it presents. Once again, bring up the percentage so that you can see it more easily. And get rid of that, spreads it out. So we can use this here. This is a broader one. So there's also a gray line here. Now, one of the useful things about looking at advertisements is that there's a possibility that your ancestors might have run some businesses. And if you want to look that up, a lot of times you might be able to find your ancestors' business advertised in the local newspaper. So that's another good use for using that. Also go to browse this issue. The arrow that has the line on it takes you all the way back to the very first page. And this, of course, will take you to the last one. And then you can just see what's at the beginning of the newspaper. Curious about the weather? You often find that on the front page. And you might see how May was before this year. Some of you might have some more pleasant memories of May in the past. Okay, so one of the things I should probably let you know about is if you're looking for obituaries, one of the things to keep in mind is that not everyone necessarily has an obituary. A few days ago, I just looked it up, and if you want to get an obituary in the Chicago Tribune today, it's $300. And that's for a small one. If you want a larger obituary, that's $500. I've noticed that looking for obituaries, just starting off with put in a name and say, oh, I think it might be around here, that can sometimes be fairly difficult. So sometimes what you may want to do is use some of our other resources to find out this is the precise date that the person passed away, some other information, and then put that into some of our other databases. A very good one for that is Heritage Hub. And Heritage Hub, when we went into newspapers, there's another option for genealogy. If you go into that, that'll take you over to Heritage Hub. So one of the things you might be looking for, and again, yeah, I probably should just show you that. So here on the left side, you'll see one for genealogy. So if we start from the beginning, there's newspapers, same e-library, can take you over to genealogy. Then you go to America's Obituaries and Death Notices, which is Heritage Hub. And that's how you end up there. So let's look for a name. Libby Levin, 1998. You can put in keywords if you want to. I don't suggest doing that when you first start, because there have been a number of times where I looked for a name, I put in the year, and it found the person with no problem. But then I put in a keyword, the computer didn't necessarily recognize it right away, and it couldn't find the same person. So keyword can be useful, but I wouldn't suggest starting a search. And really, that's what a lot of genealogy is. You start small and you add more and more things to it in order to narrow in your search. So we're going to click search. So it brings up the information, including from where it came. So we click in that. If we want, we can read through this, but as you see right here, you can hit this green arrow. And I don't have the volume turned up too high because quite often that causes some problems with the stream. But as you can see, it's reading it for you. You can adjust the speed here. And over here, there's some more settings where you can make the text larger and a few other things. Another fun thing is you can download it as an MP3, which will be basically downloading a sound clip to your computer or laptop. So now that we have some more specific information, we're going to click on ProQuest itself. And over here, we're going to hit clear form. So now I'm going to type in Libby. Levin. As always, we want full text. It takes an obituary a couple of days to come out. So we're going to say on this date, April 15th, 1998, because we received all that information from the previous screen. We're going to search all of these. We have some more options here. We're going to keep it on relevance 20. We're going to exclude duplicate documents, though. And so now the search really is on the bottom, which is useful. So we're going to take a look at this one. Full text as opposed to details. Once again, it's difficult to see at 59%, so we're going to raise that to 200. Going to use this to slide around. And as you see, it's colored in the sections to find the person that you're looking for. And this is another great time where you want to cite where you found that. So that part is on looking for obituaries, but something else you might be curious on is what did your ancestors possibly live through? And as we saw, this newspaper can go back pretty far. So I'm going to hit ProQuest at the top left, clear form on the right, and start a new search. It's going to take a look at some Chicago history. Only instead of saying anywhere, we're going to say in all abstract and summary text. And if it's in the abstract or summary, that means we're going to most likely find articles that are dealing with a lot more Chicago history instead of finding something that just mentions Chicago and random, but really doesn't have anything to do with Chicago. So we're going to think of a big moment in history, fire. Once again, abstract and summary text, full text. Actually, you know what? Let's choose after this date. September 30th, 1871. Going to take a look at everything. Relevance, we want to see what the people at that time might have been reading, what was being reported. So instead of using relevance, we're going to say oldest first. Otherwise, we might end up with an article from 1997 talking about it. So I'm going to go ahead and do the search. Even though we narrowed it down so much, we still get well over 14,000 results. And that's one of the reasons why it's helpful to say oldest first so the computer knows how to stack them. And this time you can see it's looking at a whole lot of different things. And I see there's some questions coming in. I'll get to those at the end of the program because there's some things I'll probably end up covering while the program's continuing. All right, so one of the things you might want to do while looking at something like this, since that's a very popular event, take more filters, company and organizations. So as a number of you may already know, the Chicago Fire is also the name of a sports team. And we're not really looking for that. So this allows you to, choose some different filters that you might want to use in case you're trying to find something from that time, which means Twitter probably wasn't around in 1871. But again, we took care of a lot of that by saying Otis first. So we're going to go ahead and take a look. Full text. Once again, that's sort of difficult to read, even though it's already at 197%. So we're going to go ahead and bring that up to 250. Or if you want, you can even bring it up to 300. And one of the nice things about this is that at this point, we're reading a primary source material. So if you decide to get a history book on the Chicago fire, you might get some of this information. But when you're looking at a history book, you're also reading the interpretation of the historian or the author who wrote it. They might mention some things and skip some other things. A nice thing about using this is that we get to see exactly what people were talking about at that time. Now, there's positives and there's some negatives to that. And the thing you want to look out for is what I'm going to cover at the end of the program, because you can get some pretty interesting interpretations on some certain historical events. Okay. So one of the things we're going to take a look at is over on here on the right-hand side, suggested sources. So, we're still dealing with 1871, 1893, 1871. One of the things you might notice is that one of these says New York Times. Now, one of the things that we made sure that we didn't do was when we were taking a look at this, we did not click on show results outside of my library subscription. So when we go in and we see New York Times, will we be able to read that? Let's click on it. And there's the New York Times. You can see the information over there, October 9th, 1871. You can see how they were covering it as well. Okay, so let's go back to the Chicago article. And we'll go ahead and browse the entire issue. Go to the main page. So there you can see the beginning of the Chicago Tribune all the way back to the 1870s. And as you can see at the very top, this was definitely big news at the time. So now we're going to do another search. ProQuest, clear form. So that probably wasn't the happiest thing in Chicago history to look at. Important if you're writing a research paper or doing a project on that, that's a great way to go about it. But now let's have a little bit of fun here. Let's type in bears. Once again, we're going to take a look at all abstract summary text. Super Bowl, all abstract and summary text, because we probably wouldn't want to read most news articles about how the Bears have played. Full text. And let's take a look at a specific date range. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at January 27th, 1986. Let's take that up to January 31st, 2007. We're not going into February of 2007 because we don't need to remember that Bears Super Bowl. So as you can see, we can limit it. Select all. Maybe raise this to 50. And we can take a look at the oldest first again, just to remember how the newspapers were reporting immediately afterwards. search. Let's just take a look at this first one. No contest bears the best. When was the last time you saw that? So this is something nice to take a look at, a lot of fun. You zoom in a bit. Get a good look at that picture. Move it over a bit. So we see Dan Hampton and Otis Wilson. So as you can see, Dan Hampton is a lot jollier there than he often is on the radio. If you ever listen to the news after a Bears game, this is probably what he's remembering. So that's a good way to remember some fun times. Now we're going to go back to the results, top left. You could use arrows to go back, but I've noticed sometimes it ends up spinning around and having some difficulty sometimes doing that. So we can use back results or just hitting ProQuest. I've noticed that has worked a lot better for me. So now we're going to take a look at some more filters. Let's look for a person. You can say more. It gives you a few there, but there are a few more that you can choose from there. We'll take a look at Mike Ditka. Apply. And so here you get to see some more articles if you want to remember some happy days when we had Ditka, such as nastiness traced to Ditka. Or let's see. Ditka, I never root for anyone. So for those of you who may have forgotten what interviews with Mike Ditka, what those interviews were like, here's a good way to remember those days. Okay, so we've spent a lot of time taking a look at the Chicago Tribune. Okay, and that is taking entirely too long. So let's just go ahead and close that one out. Okay, so once again, e-library, newspapers. I'm going to take a look at New York Times Currently Historical. And that was a lot of clicking because I'm used to just clicking on a bookmark on my computer, but I'm giving a presentation, so I'm using a different laptop right now, which doesn't have that. So I'll remember that for next time. So New York Times Current and Historical, which is also ProQuest. So the searches will be done in a fairly similar manner. Advanced search, I always do advanced search first. Then we're going to clear the form. So something you might be interested in is what land did your ancestors once have, or property, or a number of things who might it have gone to. So we're going to type in real estate. Market. Okay, I'm really messing up here. Okay, real estate market. Full text as always. And take a look at on this date. Let's just say October 5th, 1910. It's going to select all for the document type, source types. This is already filled in because we've been continuously doing the same searches all of this time. Some people are watching from the windows. So we've been doing the same searches for all this time, and we're still using ProQuest, so it remembered a lot of the things that we chose before. So now I'm going to go ahead and say search. So we narrowed it down pretty well. We were just looking at one day, so we only have 3 results. Let's take a look at in the real estate field. And one of the nice things about this is you'll get some discussion about properties, but a lot of times people are named in these. So if you're trying to remember, hey, I remember some property was sold at this date, but I don't remember who it went to, this is a great way to research that. So let's try another one. ProQuest, clear form. We can also say real estate and transfer, full text. This time we're going to take a look at a specific date range. So let's say we're going to take a look at March 30th. Let's go way back. 1898. Go to July 1st. Also 1898. We're going to select all for the source type and document type. And we're going to make a search for that. Now, once again, we have a whole bunch of options here on the left that we can take a look at. Under document type, let's choose feature this time. So this time we have a good number of more articles because we gave a larger number of dates, but we also narrowed it down to feature articles. So in the real estate field, we're going to take a look at that. Once again, that's difficult to read, so we're going to change that to 200. So, okay, so here's some more articles about how you can buy a 5-story brick tenement building for $25,000 in New York. So once again, we see that we are looking very far into the past. But another thing that's nice about this, we'll use the slider at the bottom. Recorded real estate transfers. So there you can see what went where. So let's go ahead and browse this issue. Go to the first page by using the arrow that's by the line. So at the top here, when you hover, which means you take the pointer, put it over, and you don't tap anything, it'll tell you, okay, there's the table of contents. And now you can see where everything is in the newspaper, just like we were using a regular newspaper. So we see real estate page 10. And go back to browse this issue. Page 10, hit go. As you can see, a lot of advertisements and a lot of other things. But there's something else that's interesting about looking at old newspapers. I'm going to go to the bottom right here. And we can read about court cases. This is another interesting thing that you can do to learn about the past, but fair warning to everyone that does real estate research, there is a good chance you will find relatives in here. Take my word for it, whenever you're studying your family history, you're going to find some wonderful people, and you're also going to find some people that did some not so wonderful things. So always keep that in mind when researching your history. Now, one of the things that I mentioned earlier on was you want to be careful of newspapers because newspapers are not infallible. There are a lot of things that you can learn about, but there's also a lot of really goofy things that you can read about from old newspapers. And we're going to take a look at that. E-library, newspapers. And again, for the library's web address, it's just schaumburglibrary.org. So that'll take you to us. So let's see, what would have something that would be very interestingly inaccurate? So I'm not picking on the Wall Street Journal. I'm not saying the Wall Street Journal is a bad newspaper. I do encourage people to read the Wall Street Journal. But sometimes you can find some very interesting things about how people predicted the stock market. So we're going to go to advanced search, clear form. So let's see, stock market, stock market by full text. Let's see, what's a really good date to pick for the stock market? How about on this date, August 1st, 1929. So we're gonna do a select all. And go ahead and search for that. So let's see, we've got a number of articles here. Press the market, that looks like a good one. Bring up the percentage so we can read it a bit more easily. And let's see what they're suggesting. So taking a look at it. Many of the recent features were firm again yesterday. Pessimists had been looking for another period of irregularly lower tendencies, but when it was demonstrated that stocks were meeting with better support, some of these interests started covering shorts and aided in keeping a good tone in the general list. There were no signs of pressure, and apparently the bears had abandoned their attempts to inaugurate a sharp reaction, at least temporarily. Well, that sounds really great. Sounds like August 1st, 1929 was a really great time to buy stocks. So let's try something else out here. So we're going to go back to results. And let's just go to ProQuest. Start all over again. We're going to keep the same search. We're just going to change the date. So let's take a look at November 1st, 1929. See if anything has changed. Broad Street Gossip, the sun is shining again. Change percentage up. The sun is shining again, and we will go on record as saying some good stocks are cheap. Yeah, they would be cheap. At this time, we say good stocks are cheap because John D. Rockefeller said it first. Only the foolish will combat John D.'s judgment. So that's November 1st. Well, it seems like it's saying everything's okay here because John D. Rockefeller said so. And August, they were thinking highly. So right now, this is November 1st. Let's go back. Just see if anything interesting might have happened in between there. Let's take a look at October 29th, 1929. We're just going a couple of days before that article. Market orderly and record drop. Again, we want to be able to read it. So when you take a look at this, another heavy wave of liquidation hit the stock market Monday, resulting in a general price decline, which carried most stocks to levels below those reached before Thursday's wild session. The severest price decline occurred in the final hour when approximately 3 million shares, about 1/3 of the day's total, changed hands. So that doesn't sound quite as happy. Let's go down a couple paragraphs. This is what I find interesting. It was further indicated that the price decline yesterday was not wholly unexpected. Stock exchange routine is such that many traders learned of their position over the weekend, and with the general level of prices sharply lower, a considerable amount of liquidation to adjust accounts was anticipated. But it didn't seem like we were reading that earlier. I mean, the articles earlier seemed like they were pretty optimistic. Um, they complained about pessimists, but they didn't really go into too much detail of, and this is what the pessimists are saying. Yeah, so that's an example of something of great interest. And for those of you that are possibly still wondering about why I chose those dates, October 29th, 1929 was Black Tuesday. And that was the great stock market crash, which it seems a number of these articles don't want to admit to. Sometimes you have to go a little bit further into the future to see something on that. So now we're going to take a look at stock market, all abstract, 1929. So that's all abstract too. While we're at it, you see this add row. You can go ahead and add another row there. It's going to add store. On this date, April 21st, 1987. Select all, select all. Do a search for that. Tales from the dark side, what a market crash might look like. Full text. Raise this up. My grandfather had an Army Navy store in 1929. And when the stock market crashed, his comment was, it serves those rich persons right. But as you see, it says 6 months later, he lost the store. And that's an example of how when you're researching, it's good to see what's being said at the time. That's very useful, but you don't want to stop there. We also have other databases like Explora, which would give you a very detailed explanation of the stock market crash of 1929. So those are some other things to take a look at. And as always, whenever doing genealogy work, always be honest. One of the reasons is because if you try to hide something, someone later on is going to find that, because these records are kept for a long time. As you saw, we were taking a look at things from the 1800s. So always be honest. So that concludes this specific presentation on some of the newspapers we have. Heavy emphasis on some, because as you probably saw, we have a lot. So the next genealogy program, we're going to be bringing back the small discussion groups. So that will be on Tuesday, June 11th from 2 to 3 p.m. It's going to be at this library branch in the Rasmussen North room. That'll be upstairs. That will be open by then. And that won't be a presentation. That'll just basically be people coming together to discuss what they've researched, what you've learned while doing genealogy, sharing stories, essentially speaking, a short discussion hour. The next large event will be Underground Railroad in Northern Illinois. That's going to be Tuesday, June 18th from 6:30 to 7:30 in the workshop room. And we'll be talking about how the Underground Railroad existed in Northern Illinois, but also how the presenter researched some of it, which might help some of us with our historical research. So thank you for coming. Now let me take a look at some of the questions. So one person's asking, how do you find an obituary if you're not sure of the city or state or date? So they asked about the Latter-day Saint records. Yes, we do have the database Family Search that's connected with the Latter-day Saint records. So that's one that you can use. You can also take a look at Ancestry and some of the other databases that we have. Also, if you go to our YouTube page, you'll see a presentation like this that I gave maybe about 2 months ago. But basically look for me on our Schaumburg Library YouTube page, and you'll see where I'm talking about some of those databases and how to handle that. I also record the presenters, but I can only keep the presenters for about 2 weeks. So the longer ones will usually be of me. Okay, does anyone who's present have a question? No, if you want to use Ancestry here at the library, it is free. Again, I recommend bringing 2 flash drives with you. One of the situations with Ancestry and also Family Search is that if you want to get the most out of it, you have to use it here in the library. And if you find a record that you really like, you'll want to either print it or download it to, at minimum, 2 flash drives. But there's no fee for it. If you get onto our public computers, easiest way to get on is with Schaumburg Library Card. if you don't live in the Schaumburg area, you can use our guest passes to use the computers that can be found here. Also, you would have to come in person, enjoy the cookies and drinks that we have in the back. Just a reminder to everyone. Okay, you're welcome. Yes.
I have one question. When you were going back to the searches and you put the word real estate in the first blank box and then the word transfer in the second box, why didn't you put it all in the same box?
So computers can be interesting. You probably could do it that way, but I didn't want it to only look for the exact phrase real estate transfer. I want to look for real estate, and then I also want to look for transfers of real estate. And that's one of the ways you want to be careful. For example, I put real estate. Oh, the question was, why did I put real estate in one box and then transfer into another box? I want to make sure it was looking for real estate together. So I put real estate in one box, but I didn't necessarily need for it to look for the exact phrase real estate transfer. So because of that, I put those into separate boxes. Again, it looks like no one was sharing his screen. Okay, so any other questions before we end? Okay, then. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and I'll try to get this up. If not by tomorrow, then hopefully by the day after tomorrow.